Hello, welcome to Z Murray Design. Let's upcycle a pair of jeans into a sewing caddy. So let's get started. I'll start by using my seam ripper to take off my belt loops and to remove my waistband. And I will hang on to the waistband to use it later in the project. Next, I'll fold the jeans in half just to get a rough cut to prepare the jeans for the pattern. I'm going to measure down about 22 inches just to separate the top from the bottom legs, and then just make a mark and cut across. And I'll cut across that center seam, the crotch area, all the way across. And I'm just going to cut right along the flat felt seam there. And I'm going to cut across the center right alongside the zipper. And then separate that back seam right along the flat seam there. Now doing it this way, I have a front pocket and a back pocket on both sides of each of my panels. Now my pattern measures 19 by 15, and you can make this larger or smaller. I'm going to turn the pants toward me here so I can get a better angle. I'm going to flatten out these pants as best I can. I'm going to make sure that my pattern is going to come right below that top rivet there, the top rivet on the waistband. And I want to make sure that I get as much of that back pocket intact. So I'm just adjusting my pattern until I like where it sits on the jeans. I'll pin the pattern in place and then cut out the first panel. I'm going to move that pocket out of the way to make sure that I don't cut it, because I want to leave that pocket intact. So now when I cut out my second panel, I had to do a little finagling because that back pocket sits up a little higher. You see where it sits up higher toward the waistband when I cut it out. So I just removed the pocket with my seam ripper, and I'm just going to lower it just a little bit so it doesn't get caught in the top seam once I start sewing the top waistband part. So I just sew it back on, and I'll just follow those same seam lines that are there. So now when you cut out your panel, I'm just going to pin that top pocket there and just sew right across the top, just so that it's not just flopping around as I'm trying to sew. So now that my top pocket is sewn and I removed and switched my other pocket around, I'm going to cut out my corners to create my box corners, and I'm going to make my box corners 3 inches by 3 inches so that my box corners are 6 inches across. You can make them larger or smaller. And I'll do that on all four corners on both panels. So now that my corners are cut out, I want to create a few more pockets on the front panel here. Now I could use my lining fabric. This is going to be my lining fabric, and make a pocket. Or you could upcycle another pair of jeans and remove the pocket and put those on the front. I just make sure that I move that inner pocket, move it to the side, pin it in place so that it doesn't get caught as I'm sewing. And I'm going to mark where the pocket ends, where that inside pocket ends. So I'll know how far up to come. Now I could lay down this pocket, lay it right there on the top. And sew around. But I'm not liking how that looks with the blue denim on the black denim. So I'm just going to make a pocket with my lining fabric. And I just cut 2 pieces that are 7.5 by 7.5, and I'll take a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I cut 2, put them right sides facing, and then I pin it in place. I leave an opening about 2 inches for turning. Back stitch, sew all the way around, and back stitch at the end, leaving that opening to turn it right side out. So now that I have the pocket all sewn, have my opening, clip my corners, and turn it right side out, poking those corners out. Now I'm going to use my pokey tool there to poke out those corners. If you're using scissors, just be really careful not to poke a hole in your corners. You can use a upcycle pair of chopsticks, works great too. I'm going to press it out, and then I'm going to top stitch the top. So I have my opening at the bottom. I'll top stitch the top, and I'll increase the stitch length to about 3.0, 3.5, and I'll do that on both of those pockets to prepare those to attach. So now that I have that top stitching done, I'm going to put it there at the end of the where that pocket ends. Now that after I've sewn everything together, I could have brought that up a little higher, because as long as I miss sewing on top of where the pocket is, that inside pocket, and then just sew all the way around, and then just make sure that you back stitch at the beginning and the end really good, because that'll be a stress point for both of your pockets. So now I have extra pockets attached to the front of my panels. I am ready to put my fusible interfacing. So the rough side of my fusible interfacing is the fusible side, and then I have some cotton polyester blend batting. It's an 80-20 blend, and I cut those panels the same size as my pattern. So now I'm going to fuse fusible interfacing on first, straightening out that pocket really well, and then just follow your manufacturer's instruction for your fusible interfacing. And this is just a mid-weight fusible interfacing, and then I just press it in place. And then I'm just going to cut out those box corners. and I'll do that on both of the panels. Next, I'm going to do my batting. You can use fusible batting for this. This is just regular quilting cotton batting. And I'm just going to pin baste that in place. Now you can also use some spray basting if you like. But I'm just going to pin baste it in place. And then I'll just sew around the panel to attach my batting all the way around, including sewing around the box corners. And I'll do that on both of the panels. Now that I have my batting sewn around, I'm going to cut out the box corners and do any trimming that's necessary if my batting has shifted while I was sewing it. And we'll be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance when we put these panels together. But before we put our panels together, grab your waistband that you removed earlier. I'm going to cut off where the button loop is, and then I'm going to trim right along the top edge of the top stitching to create 2 separate pieces there. I didn't find it necessary to do any unpicking with the seam ripper. You can just cut right along the top edge. And now you have 2 pieces. Now one edge is already pressed and folded on up, and I'm just going to take the pressed edge and I'm going to put that right at the top edge of the raw edge of our panel, and I'm going to meet the raw edge, but I'm going to keep the top part of it folded, and I'm going to pin it in place, and then I'll just take it to the machine and right along where the top stitching was previously when we removed it from the jean earlier, I'm just going to use that same seam and just top stitch. And I'm just going to use the pre-printed lettering that's already on there, just as an extra added detail. That pre-printed label part. And I will do that on both jeans because we had 2 separate pieces. And then just trimming it to the size of the panel. And once again, I'll increase the top stitching to 3.0 or 3.5 and just top stitch it on. Now my waistband is top stitched on. My pockets are intact. It's time to put our 2 panels together. But before I do that, I'll go ahead and with my remaining bottom of my pant leg, I'll go ahead and prep my handles. So my handles measure 4.5 by 8.5. You can lengthen these if you like. I'm going to cut 2 of those and just pinning my pattern in place. And so now that I have 2 of the handles cut, I'm going to fold it in half. Raw edges, wrong sides in half. I'm going to do a crease, press a crease in the center. And then I'm going to bring that one edge of the raw edge to meet the center. Bring the other side of the raw edge to meet the center, and right now what you're doing making these handles is just enclosing all of your raw edges so that you don't have any raw edges. Fold it again, and now your handles are very sturdy this way. And then I'll take it to the machine, pinning everything in place, and I'll just top stitch on both sides. And I'll do this for both of the handles. So now that both of my handles are top stitched, I'll attach them after I sew the panels together. So I'm going to put right sides facing, matching my side seams. I'm going to make sure that the waistband, that those seams meet. And again, we're sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we'll sew the side seam, sew the bottom seam, and sew the other side seam. Do not sew your boxed corners, just your side seams and your bottom seam. Now that my seams are sewn, I'm going to press my seams open. And pressing your seams open makes it easier to box the corner, and it'll make it easier when it's time for us to put the caddy together. So now you're going to bring your bottom seam up to meet your side seam. To box that corner, pin both of those seam allowances open. Pin all the way across. And you're going to sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you'll do that on both sides. So now my box corners are pinned in place, so a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and your bag is all boxed, and so when you stand it up, it stands up nice and sturdy. So I'm going to trim my box corner to a 1/2 inch seam allowance just to get rid of the bulk when I turn it right side out. Now turn your bag right side out and make sure that you push out those box corners when you do. And now it's time for us to attach our handles. Now we're going to attach the handles on the side. So on the side where the boxed corners are. I'm going to get my tape measure, and so you can see what I'm doing here. So my side seam is my center. I'm going to measure 2 inches on either side of that center seam. I put my 2 inch mark there, measure out and put a clip, 2 inches, measure out and put a clip. And then I will attach my handles. So I have one side where I've measured it and making sure that my seam allowance is pressed open there. Take my 2 inch mark, 2 inches from that seam, and you'll do this on both sides. So when I put my handles on, I'm going to orient my bag so that it makes sense to me and I don't get my handles on crooked. I'm going to put my handles down. Turn it the right way here, so make sure that your handles are straight. This is how your handles will normally be if you're holding your bag. Then you're going to turn them back on toward the bag. Hope that makes sense. I always just double check my handles before I base them in place. Make sure that they are going to be the right way when I hold the bag. So I'm going to now take it to the sewing machine. And also a 1/4 inch seam allowance to attach those handles. Now my handles attached to the caddy, and the caddy stands up straight. push out those box corners, and the caddy outside part is all ready. Let's prepare our lining. So now I've already cut my lining, the same size as my outer panels, and I cut 2 of those. Now you can use fusible interfacing on this if you like. I didn't, but if you want a sturdier caddy, you certainly can use fusible interfacing. Now to prepare our inside pockets, I measure my inside pockets. I measure it 9 inches by 19 inches, and I want it the exact same width as the lining. And then I measure it 9 inches high. And then I'm going to cut 2 of those. So I'll cut 4 totals because I want pockets on both sides of the inside lining. And then I'm going to put those right sides facing, making sure that my directional fabric is in the right direction. And then I'm going to pin on the top, and I'm going to pin on the bottom. And I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the top and the bottom. I'll leave the side seams open because you'll catch your side seams when you sew your side seams of your lining. So right now just sew the top seam and the bottom seam. So now I have that done. I'm going to turn this right side out. I'm going to make sure that that seam is rolled out, and I'm going to give this a really good press on the top and the bottom. And once I press everything, when I take it to the sewing machine, I'm going to top stitch on the top. And again, using a 3.0, 3.5 stitch length. And now one of my pockets is all ready to attach to the panel. I'm going to find the center and just crease the center of the lining. Now I'm going to measure down 2 inches from the top. And I'm just going to mark it with my marking tool. And that'll be where I place the top part of the pocket. And then I'll measure up at least 2 inches from where that box corner is going to be, just to make sure that I don't get the pockets caught in the box corners. I'll mark it with a pin so you can see how far down I'm coming. And then I will take I'm going to fold it in half, and then I'm going to crease it so I can find the center mark. But where I have the top stitching, that's going to be where I'm going to start placing where the pin marks are, 2 inches down from the top. And I see that I did clear those box corners, and you see the corners where you didn't sew. You're going to pin that part in place, and I'll catch that side of the pocket in the seam allowance when I put the inside lining of the caddy together. But I'll pin it all the way around. And I'll pin the top part just so it doesn't shift on me. So now I'm going to start by marking my center seam. Now you can make your pockets as wide as you like. I'm going to mark that center crease line first, and that'll be my first seam that I sew to make these pockets. You can keep them wide. I usually separate them. I start with my outer part of the pocket and I mark it 5 inches. And then that makes that next pocket about 4 7/8. but that outside pocket measures 5 inches. The next one measures about 4 7/8. And then I do the same thing on the other side. I come in about 5 inches. Well, not about 5 inches. I come in exactly 5 inches. And I mark. And then again, that'll make that second pocket about 4 7/8. Now you can make these pockets as large or small as you want. So I will baste the side seam, come across, go up and down, basting or sewing to make sure that I'm separating those pockets. And I'm back stitching at the beginning and the end several times because that'll be stress points as you start to put things in your pockets. And I do that on both sides of the lining. So now my pockets have been created and attached. You can see how large and they are, large enough to get several pairs of scissors in there, or needles, or whatever you want to use your caddy for, and whatever you plan to put inside. So now let's put the linings together, right sides facing. So your side seams, so your bottom seam, but on your bottom seam you're going to leave about 4 inches to turn this caddy right side out. And I usually mark mine by putting an X where my opening is going to begin and where my opening is going to end. I put an X with my pins just to remind myself as I get to the sewing machine. Back stitching at my X of my pins from one side to the other side of the box corner. And you see I have my opening. I'm going to press those seams open. Makes it easier to box that corner. Matching your side seam with your bottom seam on that box corner. I make sure that that center seam, that they meet. Putting a pin in one seam, making sure it comes out the other side. Make adjustments if you need to. And then pinning everything in place. And again, I'm sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I'll do that on both sides. Everything is pinned in place. We'll sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you see where we have our opening at the bottom. Our corners are boxed. I'm going to leave my lining wrong side out. The outside part of the caddy is right side out. I'm going to put the caddy inside the lining. And matching up the side seams, making sure that my handles are inside, in between the lining and in between the caddy. I'll match the side seams up first. And I'll use my clips because it's going to be pretty thick. This is where your denim needle is going to come in handy. You can also use a leather needle. I'm going to pin those side seams in place first, and then I'll pin the center seam, that center crease line. I'll pin those in place, and then I'll pin around and use as many pins as you need to. You see I use lots of clips, and now I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now I'm going to pull everything right side out through the opening. And just take your time pulling everything out. And then just making sure to poke out your box corners on both the lining and the main body of the caddy. I'm going to fold in those seam allowances, and then I'm going to sew those closed. Put your lining on the inside. And now I'm going to press that lining. I'm going to press it down so that it doesn't show from the outside. I usually use some pins to hold it in place. Take it to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew about a 1/2 inch down. You can feel where that seam allowance is. I'm going to sew right below the seam allowance, and I'm going to increase my stitch length to 3.0, 3.5, and then just top stitch all the way around, and then your caddy is all done. So now I've top stitched all the way around, and my caddy is done. I have my inside pockets, outside pockets, and now this caddy it's very roomy, lots of pockets. It holds quite a bit. It's very sturdy. You can put, that's my box of embroidery floss. It fits right in there nicely. Lots of pockets for scissors, and put my markers on one side. I was able to empty out about 3 containers filled with things, various sizes of containers, and I was able to put all of that in one caddy. So now if you're traveling and you have some projects that you want to do on the go, or that you're taking to your quilt guild or your sewing group, just put them right in your caddy along with all of the other sewing supplies, and you have a nice caddy that sits up right on the table for you to use, or for storage in your sewing room, which is what I'm going to use these for. I like the detail with all of the imprinted parts on there. And I hope you like this project, and I hope you'll give it a try. And that's the first one that I made. Thanks for watching.